Half a world away from Detroit's assembly lines, a different kind of muscle found its voice. It wasn't born here, but it survived here, under tougher skies, on lonelier roads. This is the story of how America's loudest dream crossed the Pacific, and how a country on the other side of the world made it its own. In the late 1960s, Detroit was the heartbeat of horsepower. Camaro, Mustang, Charger, each name carried the promise of power, and every engine told America's story of ambition. On the other side of the world, Australians were building their own muscle. Holden Monaro, Ford Falcon, GT, Valiant Charger. Machines built for open land and brutal heat. Then came the imports. Post-war films, visiting GIs, and racing magazines carried Detroit's roar across the Pacific. When the first Mustangs and Camaros landed at Sydney docks, people didn't just look. They listened. They weren't practical. They weren't cheap. But they were pure theater. And Australia fell in love with the sound. Sydney, 1988. A retired mechanical engineer named Peter Reynolds finds a forgotten 1969 Camaro SS abandoned behind a shed near Bathurst. It's little more than rust and memories. But Peter sees something others don't. He buys it, not as an investment, but as a connection, a link to the Saturday nights he once spent watching American drag races on black and white television. In a narrow garage behind their house, father and son rebuild a dream. They learn by doing, import parts piece by piece. Fight, rust, cost, and time. Neighbors shake their heads. Why not fix a Holden? They say. But Peter keeps going. Months turn to years. The Camaro becomes a second heartbeat in the house. The smell of oil mixing with dinner smoke. The sound of wrenches echoing through weekends. And one morning, it lives again. That sound, deep, raw, unmistakable, rolls through Sydney streets. For a moment, the whole neighborhood stops to listen. Word spreads. A small club forms around him. Painters, mechanics, dreamers, men and women who see these cars not as relics, but as stories worth keeping alive. 2-3 generations, one engine, and a story that began half a world away. What started as a restoration had become a legacy. By the 1990s, Australia wasn't just importing Detroit's a dream, it was reshaping it. The country had built its own definition of power. Holden's special vehicles brought supercharged V8s to local streets. Ford's Falcon GT, built in Broadmeadows, became a homegrown icon. This was no longer imitation. It was evolution. Peter's Camaro had become more than a restoration. It was a bridge connecting Detroit's legacy to Australia's ingenuity. When the Holden Monaro returned in 2001, then exported back to America as the Pontiac GTO, the circle was complete. For the first time, the sound of Australian muscle echoed through Detroit streets. It wasn't imitation anymore, it was integration. Two worlds sharing a single heartbeat made of steel and fuel. Every engine tells a story. For some, it's about speed. For others, it's about belonging. The American muscle car in Australia became more than just a machine. It became a mirror, reflecting independence, was craftsmanship, and nostalgia for a time when the road itself felt infinite. Today, across Sydney, Melbourne, and Perth, you can still hear that same sound on quiet Sunday mornings. Engines idling, families laughing, a legacy that outlived its birthplace. In the end, it was never about where these cars came from, but how they made people feel. A shared heartbeat that crossed oceans. As the sun sets over Sydney, these machines rest quietly their stories, written not in words, but in miles. Decades later, the same car that crossed oceans still turns heads, not for its speed, but for what it represents, a bond between two worlds built on chrome and passion. If you're hunting for one of these imports today, remember, every detail matters. Frame integrity? Check for rust beneath the chassis. Original drivetrain? Verify block codes match the title. Import legality? Confirm the compliance plate is authentic. Restoration cost? Expect at least 1.8 times the U.S. price. Community? Join your local vintage muscle network, because knowledge keeps history alive. So next time you hear a V8 echo across the outback, remember, that's not just Detroit's roar. That's the sound of two worlds meeting halfway.